In the glittering ballrooms of 1818 London, where a young woman's worth was measured in titles and dowries, Camilla Vaughan had none. She was a shadow, a penniless orphan, living on the bitter charity of her aunt, destined for a life of quiet servitude. They saw her as plain, powerless, and utterly insignificant, but they knew nothing of the sharp mind that hid behind her downcast eyes. One night, amidst the cruel whispers and dismissive glances, the most powerful man in England, the cold and unapproachable Rhys St. Clair, Duke of Ulverston, did the unthinkable. He strode through the stunned crowd, and before the highest echelons of society, he placed his ducal signet ring, the symbol of his immense power and legacy, directly onto her trembling hand. The gasp that swept the room was only the beginning. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was an act of war. And Camilla, the girl they thought was a pawn, was about to become its queen. The air in the Marchioness of Pemberton's ballroom was a suffocating concoction of expensive French perfume, beeswax, and wilting gardenias. It clung to the damask curtains and settled like a fine dust on the shoulders of the unimportant. Camilla Vaughan counted herself among them. For the third time that evening, a footman, his nose held high, had attempted to take her glass of lemonade, assuming she had finished with it, simply because she was standing alone in an alcove, partially obscured by a monstrous fern. "I am still drinking this, thank you," she said, her voice barely a whisper, yet firm enough to make the young man flush before offering a clipped bow and retreating. Camilla was 20 years old, and in the 2 seasons she had been paraded through the London Tun, she had become an expert in the art of invisibility. It was a skill honed by necessity. As the orphaned niece of Lady Beatrice Huxley, she was a non-entity, a charity case her aunt was legally, though not emotionally, obligated to house. Lady Huxley made sure Camilla felt the weight of that obligation in every threadbare gown she was forced to re-stitch, in every cold portion of dinner she was served, and in every dismissive glance that slid past her, as if she were part of the furniture. Her cousin, Georgina, a girl of vapid beauty and cutting cruelty, was currently holding court near the orchestra, her laughter a sharp, tinkling sound that always set Camilla's teeth on edge. Georgina was the diamond of the family. Camilla was the pebble in their shoe. While Georgina wore silk the colour of fresh cream, Camilla was clad in a pale grey muslin that had been her mother's, altered so many times the seams were puckered and weary. It made her blend into the marble walls, which was, she knew, precisely her aunt's intention. From her shadowed nook, Camilla observed, it was her only true form of entertainment. She saw Lord Abernathy slip a note to a married baroness. She noted the way Philippa Harrington, a society belle with a predatory smile, watched the ballroom's undisputed apex predator, Rhys St. Clair, the Duke of Ulverston. The Duke was a man carved from granite and shadow, dark hair, eyes the colour of a winter's storm, and a jaw that looked as though it had been set for a battle he had no intention of losing. He was impossibly wealthy, ruthlessly intelligent, and carried the weight of his title with a chilling austerity. He did not mingle. He held a position, and society swirled around him like iron filings drawn to a magnet. Men wanted his favour, and women wanted his name. Tonight he looked particularly severe, his conversation with the ageing Lord Harrington clipped and terse. Camilla watched Harrington's florid face, his gestures too expansive, too eager. His daughter Philippa watched the Duke with an unnerving possessiveness, as if she were merely waiting for the deed to the property to be signed over. The whispers said a match was imminent. The Harrington fortune joined with the Ulverston title would create a dynasty of unparalleled power. Camilla shivered, though the room was warm. There was a coldness to the Harringtons, a brittle ambition that felt dangerous. A sharp jab to her ribs pulled her from her observations. "Stop lurking in the corners like a mouse, Camilla," Georgina hissed, her smile a perfect, pretty lie for anyone watching. "Mamma says you are to come and be presented to Mrs. Gable. Her son is a third son with no prospects and a pock-marked face, but he may be desperate enough to take you off our hands." The casual cruelty stole Camilla's breath. She simply nodded, her gaze falling to the worn toes of her slippers. To argue was to invite a more public humiliation later. She followed her cousin into the fray, her shoulders hunched, her spirit feeling as grey as her dress. As she passed the knot of powerful men, a snippet of conversation reached her. "No choice in the matter, Alveston," Lord Harrington was saying, his voice a low growl of false bonhomie. "The contracts are intertwined. My support for your shipping interests is contingent on our families being intertwined as well." The Duke's reply was so cold it could have frozen the champagne in their glasses. "I do not respond well to ultimatums, Harrington." His gaze lifted then, sweeping over Harrington's shoulder in a gesture of pure dismissal. For a fractional second, his stormy eyes met Camilla's. There was no recognition, no interest. It was the glance one might give a curtain or a chair. Yet in that fleeting moment, Camilla saw something beyond the cold arrogance. She saw a man in a gilded cage, the bars forged by others' greed. Then the moment was gone. He had looked away, and she was once again invisible. She endured the introduction to the unfortunate Mr. Gable, whose breath smelled of stale port, and whose eyes roamed her form with a disconcerting lack of subtlety. She murmured polite nothings, her mind a world away, replaying that brief, intense glance. She felt a strange, unwelcome pang of sympathy for the formidable Duke of Ulverston. He was a lion being cornered by jackals. Later, as the ball was winding down, her aunt cornered her near the vestibule. "You were a complete failure, as usual," Lady Huxley stated, her voice a low, venomous whisper. "Mr. Gable found you dull. You will be fortunate to end your days as a governess, Camilla. Remember that. Every bite of food you eat in my house is a testament to my generosity. Do not forget it." Camilla didn't reply. She merely curtsied, her back straight, and went to fetch her thin cloak. As she waited for her aunt's carriage to be called, she saw the Duke of Ulverston departing. He moved with a potent, contained energy, his valet trailing behind him with a black greatcoat. He paused at the top of the grand staircase, his profile stark against the candlelight. He looked less like a man leaving a party and more like a general surveying a battlefield before the slaughter. For the first time, Camilla felt a flicker of something other than resignation. She felt anger. Anger at her aunt, at Georgina, at the smirking Lord Harrington, at a world that measured a person's soul by the contents of their purse. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and for a moment allowed herself to meet the world's gaze without flinching. She was powerless, yes. But invisible? Perhaps not for much longer. 2 days later, a footman entered the dreary morning room, where Camilla was mending one of Georgina's lace shawls. Her head was bent over the delicate work, her fingers nimble and precise. It was one of the few things that brought her a sense of quiet accomplishment. Miss Vaughan, the butler, a man whose permanent expression was one of pained disapproval, announced stiffly. "You have a caller." Camilla looked up, her needle pausing mid-stitch. A caller? For her? It was unheard of. Visitors came for her aunt or cousin. They never asked for Camilla. There must be a mistake. There is no mistake, miss. His Grace, the Duke of Ulverston, is in the west drawing-room. He asked for you by name. The needle slipped from Camilla's numb fingers and pricked her thumb. A tiny, perfect bead of red blossomed on her skin. The Duke of Alveston? Here? For her? It was an absurdity, a cosmic joke of such proportions she felt a hysterical laugh bubbling in her throat. Her aunt, who had been reading the society pages, shot to her feet, her face a mask of disbelief and suspicion. The Duke? For you? What have you done, you wretched girl? Nothing, Aunt Beatrice. I do not know him, Camilla stammered, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Do not lie to me, her aunt hissed, grabbing her arm. You will go in there, and whatever this is, you will not bring shame upon this family. Do you understand? Camilla simply nodded, her mind reeling. She smoothed down her plain morning dress, a faded blue calico, and walked on trembling legs towards the west drawing room. The room was the grandest in the house, reserved for the most important guests. She felt like a trespasser in her own home. The Duke of Ulverston was standing by the window, staring out at the grey London street. He dwarfed the room, his presence sucking all the air from it. He was dressed impeccably in dark riding clothes, his tall boots polished to a mirror shine. He turned as she entered, and his stormy eyes raked over her, taking in her simple dress, her mending pricked fingers, and her wide, stunned eyes. There was no warmth in his expression, only a cool, unnerving assessment. Miss Vaughan, he said, his voice a low baritone that vibrated through the floorboards. Thank you for seeing me. Your Grace, she managed, dropping into a small curtsy. I cannot imagine why you have called upon me. No, I don't suppose you can, he said, gesturing to a chair opposite the one he now took. Please, sit. This is not a social call. Camilla perched on the very edge of the silk-upholstered chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The silence stretched, thick with tension. He watched her, his gaze so intense she felt it like a physical touch. He seemed to be weighing every aspect of her being. Finally, he spoke. Miss Vaughan, I have a proposition for you. It is unconventional, and it will require your utmost discretion and, I believe, your fortitude. She waited, her mind a blank slate of confusion. I find myself in a delicate position, he continued, his words chosen with surgical precision. Certain parties are attempting to force my hand in a matter of marriage. Specifically, Lord Harrington wishes me to marry his daughter, Philippa. He has leveraged certain business arrangements to make his offer. Persuasive. The curl of his lip at the word persuasive was filled with contempt. I have no intention of marrying Miss Harrington, he stated flatly. To do so would be to hand a man I neither like nor trust a key to my entire life. However, to refuse him outright will detonate a financial and political crisis I would prefer to avoid. There is only one way to neutralize his threat. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze locking with hers. I must become betrothed to someone else, immediately. Someone so unexpected, so completely outside of Harrington's calculations, that his scheme will be rendered impotable before he can counter it. Camilla stared at him, the blood draining from her face. She could see where this was heading, but her mind refused to accept it. It was madness. You, Miss Vaughan, the Duke said, confirming her impossible thought. You are the perfect candidate. You are a gentlewoman by birth, so the union is not a complete mésalliance. You are unattached. You have no powerful family to interfere or make demands. By all accounts, you are quiet, unobtrusive, and overlooked. You are, if you will forgive my frankness, the last person anyone in London would ever expect me to marry. His frankness was a physical blow. Overlooked, unobtrusive. He was describing her as if she were a piece of furniture he was considering acquiring. You wish to feign a betrothal. With me? She whispered, her voice hoarse. I do, he said, with no hint of emotion. In return for your cooperation, I will see you are provided for. Handsomely. I will settle a generous income upon you for life. You will have your own homes, a staff, the freedom to pursue whatever quiet hobbies you enjoy. You will be free from your current living situation. He glanced around the opulent but unhomely room, a clear understanding in his eyes. You will want for nothing, materially. When a suitable amount of time has passed, a year perhaps, we will stage a quiet, amicable dissolution of the engagement. You will be a wealthy and independent woman, free to live as you please. Freedom? The word echoed in the desolate chambers of her heart. Freedom from her aunt's tyranny, from Georgina's spite, from the crushing weight of her powerlessness. He was offering her the one thing she craved above all else. But the price, it was a lie, a grand deception played out on the stage of the London Tun. Why me? She asked again, needing to understand. You saw me for a single second at the ball. How did you even learn my name? A flicker of something, impatience perhaps, crossed his face. I am the Duke of Ulverston. When I require information, I acquire it. I saw you at the Pemberton ball. You were watching everything, but you were participating in nothing. You were observant, still, and invisible. Precisely what I require. I need a partner in this charade who will not lose her head, seek to take advantage, or crumble under the pressure. I am gambling that a woman who has survived in the background for so long has developed a core of steel. Am I wrong? His question hung in the air. He wasn't asking about her beauty, her charm, or her accomplishments. He was asking about her strength, the hidden, unacknowledged strength she had used every day just to endure. For the first time, someone had looked at her and seen not a mouse, but a survivor. Her mind raced, weighing the options. A life of continued misery and servitude, or a year of terrifying pretense followed by unimaginable freedom. It was a choice between a slow death and a dangerous gamble. She lifted her chin, her gaze meeting his without wavering. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now joined by a spark of defiance. He had called her unobtrusive and overlooked. He was about to discover what a quiet woman could do when she was finally given a chance. "And what do you require of me, Your Grace?" she asked, her voice clear and steady. "What are the terms of my performance?" A ghost of a smile, so faint it was barely there, touched the Duke of Ulverston's lips. It did not reach his eyes, but it was an acknowledgement, a concession. He had not been wrong in his assessment. "The terms are simple," he said. "You will act the part of my beloved fiancé. You will be convincing. You will trust my lead in all public matters. And you will tell no one, the truth of this arrangement. In return, I offer you my name, my protection, and ultimately, your freedom. Do we have an agreement, Miss Vaughan?" Camilla took a deep breath, the scent of beeswax and her aunt's expensive polish filling her lungs for what she hoped was one of the last times. She thought of Georgina's snare and her aunt's cold disdain. She thought of a life where she could read books without having them snatched away for a chore, or walk in a garden that was her own. "We have an agreement, Your Grace." The music hall at Harrington House was the most sought-after invitation of the week. It was a calculated display of power and cultural superiority by Lord Harrington, a velvet-gloved fist to remind society of his influence. It was, the Duke of Ulverston had decided, the perfect theatre for their opening act. For 3 days, Camilla had been a prisoner of her own astounding secret. The Duke had sent a note by courier. "Be at Harrington House On Thursday evening. I will handle the rest." He had also sent a box. Inside, nestled on a bed of midnight blue velvet, was a gown of shimmering silver-grey silk. It was simple, elegant, and exquisitely made. It was more beautiful than anything she had ever owned. There was also a pair of matching slippers and a small, discreet diamond pin. There was no note of affection, only a card that read, "A necessity for the role." Her aunt had been apoplectic. "A gown? From whom? You will not wear it. You are consorting with someone, I know it. You will bring ruin upon us." "It is from a distant relation of my mother's," Camilla had lied, her voice surprisingly steady. "A small inheritance." The lie was flimsy, but her aunt's greed momentarily outweighed her suspicion. She examined the silk, her eyes narrowing. "Well, it's about time that side of the family proved useful. Do not spill anything on it." Walking into the Harringtons' ballroom on her aunt's arm, Camilla felt as though she were walking to her own execution. The silver-grey dress shimmered under the chandeliers, drawing more attention than she was accustomed to. She felt exposed, a fraud. She could feel Philippa Harrington's sharp eyes sweep over her, a flicker of disdain in them as she noted the newcomer who dared to look so elegant. Then she saw him. The Duke of Ulverston was standing near the grand piano, a figure of dark, formidable grace. He looked bored, his expression a mask of aristocratic ennui. But as Camilla entered the room, his eyes found hers. For a breathless moment, the entire crowded, noisy room seemed to melt away. He gave her the barest hint of a nod, a silent command. Now. Her heart hammered. This was it. She excused herself from her glowering aunt and began to make her way through the crowd, aiming for a relatively empty spot near the French doors that led to the terrace. It was the most terrifying walk of her life. She could feel the weight of dozens of curious glances. Who is that girl? Before she could reach her destination, a voice, dripping with saccharine venom, stopped her. "Miss Vaughan, how unexpected to see you in such fine feathers. Did you raid your cousin's wardrobe?" It was Philippa Harrington, flanked by two of her sycophantic friends. Philippa was stunning in a gown of deep crimson, a clear statement of her passion and confidence. Camilla froze, the old familiar shame washing over her. But then she remembered the Duke's words, a core of steel. She remembered his offer of freedom. She would not be this woman's victim. "Miss Harrington," Camilla said, her voice quiet but cool, "the gown is my own. I am so glad you approve." Philippa's painted smile tightened. "I did not say I approved. Grey is so drab, the color of mice." Before Camilla had to think of a reply, a deep voice cut through the air behind her. "On the contrary, I find it the color of a dove, elegant, refined, and rare." The Duke of Ulverston had moved with silent speed. He now stood beside Camilla, his presence a palpable shield. He had not even glanced at Philippa. His gaze was fixed entirely on Camilla, and it held a warmth that was utterly, convincingly false, yet it made her knees weak. The change in the atmosphere was instantaneous. Philippa Harrington's face went white with shock and fury. Her friends stared, their mouths agape. Whispers erupted around them like brush fire. "Your Grace," Philippa stammered, recovering slightly. "I was just welcoming Miss Vaughan." "I am sure you were," the Duke said, his tone icy. He then extended his hand to Camilla. "My dear, will you join me on the terrace? The air in here has suddenly become rather oppressive." He called her my dear. Camilla placed her trembling hand in his, and a jolt, real and unexpected, shot up her arm. His grip was firm, possessive. He led her through the stunned crowd towards the terrace, the whispers following them like the rustle of dry leaves. On the cool, moonlit terrace, he did not release her hand. "You handled that well," he said, his voice low. "I was terrified," she admitted. "Courage is not the absence of fear," he replied, turning to face her. The moonlight silvered the angles of his face, making him look even more remote and powerful. "It is acting in spite of it. Now, for the final act. Are you ready?" She nodded, her throat too tight for words. He took a step closer, his gaze sweeping the ballroom through the open doors. He could see Lord Harrington approaching, his face a thundercloud. He could see Lady Huxley, her fan fluttering in agitation. He could see the entire room watching them. "Camilla," he said, using her given name for the first time. The sound of it on his lips was both a shock and a strange intimacy. He lifted her left hand. His other hand went to his waistcoat pocket. He drew out a ring. It was not a delicate betrothal band, but his own personal signet ring. A heavy gold band bearing the ducal crest of Ulverston, a snarling wolf's head, intricately carved. It was a symbol of ancient power, of his very identity. It was a statement more powerful than any diamond. Lord Harrington had reached the doorway, his face purple with rage. "Ulverston, what is the meaning of this?" The Duke ignored him. His stormy eyes held Camilla's. "With this," he said, his voice carrying clearly into the suddenly silent ballroom, "I pledge my name, my house, and my protection, all that I am and all that I have." Then, slowly, deliberately, before the astonished eyes of the most powerful people in London, Rhys St. Clair, the Duke of Ulverston, slid the heavy signet ring onto the third finger of Camilla Vaughan's left hand. It was too large, of course, but it sat there, a solid, undeniable weight. A claim. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. Philippa Harrington let out a small, strangled cry. Lady Huxley looked as if she might faint. Camilla stared at the ring on her hand, the cold, heavy gold, a shocking reality against her skin. She was no longer Camilla Vaughan, the invisible woman, the poor relation. She was, to all the world, the chosen future of the Duke of Ulverston. She lifted her eyes to his, and saw in them not the warmth of a lover, but the glint of a co-conspirator, a fellow soldier in a war that had just been declared. The fury of their audience was a tangible thing, a wave of shock and outrage. Lord Harrington took a step forward, his hand clenched into a fist. "You will regret this, Ulverston." The Duke simply turned, placing Camilla's hand possessively on his arm. "I doubt that very much," he said coolly, and with the powerless girl at his side, he faced the storm he had just unleashed. The journey to Ulverston House was a silent, tension-filled blur. Camilla sat opposite the Duke in his perfectly sprung carriage, the heavy signet ring a constant, weighty presence on her finger. She had wrapped a ribbon around the base to keep it from slipping off, a practical, humbling reminder of the artifice of it all. The fury she had left behind at Harrington House was a distant roar, but the immediate, intimidating presence of the Duke was all-consuming. Ulverston House was not a house, it was a fortress of wealth and power, occupying an entire side of a prestigious London square. A phalanx of servants in the Duke's dark blue and silver livery lined the cavernous entry hall. At their head stood a severe, grey-haired woman whose posture was as rigid as her expression. "Mrs. Croft," the Duke said, his voice echoing in the marble hall. "This is Miss Vaughan, my fiancée. You will see to it that the Duchess's suites are prepared for her immediately. She will be taking up residence here." Every servant in the line, including the formidable Mrs. Croft, registered a flicker of profound shock before their professional masks slammed back into place. Camilla felt 100 pairs of eyes assessing her, judging her plain travelling cloak, her lack of a lady's maid, her very existence. Mrs. Croft, the housekeeper, gave a stiff curtsy. "Your Grace." "Miss Vaughan." "Of course, it will be done." Her tone implied that a volcano erupting in the drawing room would also be done with the same stoic displeasure. "Miss Vaughan will require a new wardrobe, everything she needs," the Duke continued, stripping off his gloves. "Engage the best modistes, and hire a suitable lady's maid for her. I leave the details to you." He turned to Camilla, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Croft has run this house since before I was born. You will find her efficient." With that, he strode off towards a door that Camilla assumed led to his study, leaving her alone with the dragon in human form. "If you will follow me, miss," Mrs. Croft said, her voice devoid of any warmth. The Duchess's suites were breathtaking. A sitting room decorated in pale blues and gold, a vast bedroom with a canopied bed large enough for 6, and a dressing room lined with empty mahogany wardrobes. It was larger than the entire floor Camilla had shared with the servants at her aunt's house. It was also cold and impersonal. The first few days were a blur of bewildered loneliness. Modistes arrived, clucking over her figure and murmuring about silks and velvets. A terrified young French girl named Annette was hired as her maid. The staff were impeccably polite, but distant. They moved around her with a careful deference that felt more isolating than her aunt's open hostility. They were the Duke's people, and she was an inexplicable anomaly he had dropped into their perfectly ordered world. The Duke himself was an enigma. He was rarely seen. They took their meals together in a dining room that could have seated 40. The silence between them was vast and echoing. He was polite, asking if she was comfortable, if she had everything she needed. But his eyes were always distant, his mind clearly on other, more important matters. She was a strategic asset he had acquired, and now he was housing her in his fortress. One evening, unable to bear the oppressive silence of her rooms, Camilla went in search of the library. She found it behind 2 towering oak doors, a cathedral of books, 2 stories high, with a spiral staircase leading to a gallery. The air smelled of old leather, paper, and lemon oil. It was the most beautiful room she had ever seen. She was running her hand along a row of botany texts when his voice made her jump. "I did not take you for a reader." Rhys was standing by the fireplace, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He had shed his formal coat, and in his shirt sleeves he looked younger, less the formidable Duke, and more a man burdened by a heavy weight. "It is my only real indulgence, Your Grace," she said, her hand dropping from the books. "You needn't call me Your Grace when we are in private." "It's inefficient," he said, a faint hint of irony in his voice. "Rhys will suffice." "Rhys," she tested the name. It felt strange and overly familiar. "And you must call me Camilla." He nodded, taking a sip of his drink. "Botany?" he asked, gesturing to the shelf. "My father was a country vicar. He had a passion for it. He taught me how to identify plants, their properties, their uses, and their dangers." A shadow of memory, both fond and painful, crossed her face. He watched her, a flicker of genuine curiosity in his eyes. A useful skill, more so than watercolors or the pianoforte, I imagine. "It has its moments," she agreed, a small, genuine smile touching her lips for the first time in days. The moment of connection was broken by the arrival of a footman with a letter on a silver tray. Rhys took it, and as he read the contents, his entire demeanor changed. The brief thaw vanished, replaced by a glacial coldness. His jaw tightened, and the hand holding the glass went white at the knuckles. "Is everything all right?" Camilla asked tentatively. He looked up, his eyes seeming to look straight through her. "It is nothing that concerns you," he said, his voice clipped and final. He tossed the letter into the fire, where it flared and turned to black ash. "Enjoy the library. I have work to do." He left without another word. Camilla stood alone in the vast, silent library, the warmth from the fire doing little to ward off the chill that had descended. He had let her in, just a crack, and then slammed the door shut. She was his fiancée, his partner in deception, but she was a world away from his actual life, from the real dangers that prompted their arrangement. That night, she found a small, leather-bound book on her bedside table. It was a rare, illustrated text on the flora of the Scottish Highlands. Tucked inside was a simple card with a single word written in the Duke's sharp, decisive hand. Rhys. It wasn't a gift of affection. It was, she suspected, an apology for his abruptness. It was also a sign. He had listened. He had remembered. In the cold, calculated world of their arrangement, it felt like a seismic shift. She began to realize that understanding the guarded, complex Duke was just as important as playing the part of his fiancée. And in his study, staring into the fire, Rhys found himself thinking not of Harrington's threats, but of the quiet, sad intelligence in Camilla's eyes as she spoke of her father. He had chosen her for her invisibility, but for the first time, he was starting to truly see her. Life at Ulverston House settled into a strange rhythm. Publicly, Camilla was a sensation. The Duke escorted her to the opera, to galleries, to drive in the park. He was attentive, possessive, and their charade was, by all accounts, a stunning success. The Tun was ablaze with gossip, but no one doubted the Duke's sincerity. He simply wasn't a man who did things by half measures. The shock had given way to a grudging acceptance, and Camilla found herself being fawned over by the very people who had once looked straight through her. Privately, their relationship remained a fragile, awkward dance. The small moments of connection, like the book on botany, were rare islands in an ocean of formal distance. Yet, Camilla was an observer by nature, and she was beginning to observe things that troubled her. She noticed the armed guards who patrolled the estate's perimeter at night, more numerous than typical for a London residence. She saw the Duke's secretary, a tense man named Mr. Finchley, burning documents in the library fireplace late one evening. And she felt the weight of the Duke's silences, which seemed to grow heavier and more fraught with each passing day. The threat from Harrington was more than just a failed marriage plot. It was a living, breathing danger that coiled around the house. Her breakthrough came from an unexpected source, her new lady's maid, Annette. The girl was young and initially terrified of her new mistress, but Camilla's quiet kindness soon won her over. One afternoon, while fitting a new gown, Annette was chattering nervously. "It is so good of His Grace to take you in, miss," she whispered, her hands fumbling with the pins, "especially with all the troubles." "Troubles?" Camilla asked, her voice calm. Annette's eyes widened, and she clapped a hand over her mouth. "Oh, I should not have spoken. Mrs. Croft would have my head." Camilla placed a reassuring hand on the girl's arm. "Annette, the Duke's well-being is my primary concern. If there is something I should know, you must tell me. I will protect you." Hesitantly, Annette began to speak. The whispers among the staff were of the old Duke, Rhys's father. He had died in a hunting accident on the Harrington estate nearly a decade ago. It had been ruled an accident, but the long-serving staff had always had their doubts. They said Lord Harrington and the old Duke had been bitter rivals, not friends, locked in a dispute over a parcel of land that bordered both their estates, land rich in coal deposits. They say Lord Harrington got the land after the old Duke's death," Annette finished in a rush, "and that His Grace, our Duke, has been looking for proof of foul play ever since he inherited the title." Suddenly, everything clicked into place. The forced marriage to Philippa wasn't just about a business merger. It was about Harrington sealing his victory forever. By joining the two families, any lingering questions about the old Duke's death or the land would be buried beneath a veneer of familial unity. Rhys's sudden engagement to an outsider wasn't just a shield. It was an act of defiance, a signal to Harrington that he had not given up the fight. Armed with this new understanding, Camilla began her own quiet investigation. She spent hours in the Ulverstone library, poring over old estate maps and journals belonging to Rhys's father. The late Duke's entries from the months before his death were filled with vitriol towards Harrington, accusing him of blackmail and threats. In one entry, he mentioned a specific plant, Aconitum napellus, monkshood. He noted that Harrington cultivated a surprisingly large and secluded garden of it on his estate, claiming a purely aesthetic interest. Camilla's blood ran cold. Monkshood, also known as wolfsbane, was one of the most virulent poisons in Europe. It could be distilled into a tasteless, fast-acting poison that mimicked the symptoms of sudden heart failure. A perfect weapon for an assassination disguised as an accident. That evening, she found Rhys in his study. The room was dark, save for a single lamp illuminating a mountain of paperwork on his desk. He looked exhausted, the lines of strain etched deep around his eyes. "You should be sleeping," he said without looking up. "I know about your father," she said softly. His head snapped up, his eyes flashing with a dangerous combination of shock and anger. "Who has been talking to you?" "It doesn't matter," she said, stepping closer to the desk. "What matters is that I believe I can help." She placed the late Duke's journal on his desk, open to the page about the monk's hood. "My father taught me that every plant tells a story. Wolfsbane, cultivated in secret by a rival, tells a very dark one." Rhys stared at the journal, then back at her, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. "This is my battle, Camilla," he said, his voice rough. "I put that ring on your finger to keep you out of it, not to drag you into the heart of it." "You put that ring on my finger and made me your partner," she countered, her voice ringing with a strength she didn't know she possessed. "You underestimated Lord Harrington once. Do not make the same mistake with me. You are looking for proof in ledgers and letters. But this isn't about money, Rhys. It's about murder. And the proof you need might not be written in ink, but grown in the earth." He stood up and walked to the window, his back to her. She had crossed a line. She had pushed her way into the one part of his life he had kept locked away. She expected him to dismiss her, to order her from the room. Instead, he spoke, his voice low and strained. The magistrate at the time was in Harrington's pocket. The physician who examined the body was his cousin. Every official avenue was a dead end. All I have are whispers and my own certainty. He turned back to face her, and in his eyes she saw not the powerful Duke, but the ghost of a grieving son who had been fighting a lonely war for a decade. "What are you proposing?" he asked. "Harrington believes I am a vapid nobody, your latest folly," she said, her mind racing. "Philippa will soon be forced to extend a social olive branch, to pretend we are friends for the sake of appearances. I will accept. I will get myself invited to their country estate. I will find that garden, and I will find your proof." It was an insane, dangerous plan. But as Rhys looked at the quiet, determined woman standing before him, the woman he had chosen for her invisibility, He realized she was the most formidable ally he could ever have hoped for. She was his secret weapon. "It's too dangerous," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Being powerless is dangerous," Camilla replied softly. "You have given me a taste of power, Your Grace. Let me show you how I intend to use it." As Camilla predicted, the invitation arrived a week later. It was for the Harringtons' annual autumn ball, the crowning event of their country season. Philippa's accompanying note was a masterpiece of feigned cordiality, speaking of a desire to put unfortunate misunderstandings behind them. It was a trap, and they all knew it. Rhys was adamantly against her going, but Camilla was resolute. "They expect you to keep me locked away in London," she argued during a tense discussion in the library. "My presence there, on your arm, will be the height of arrogance. It will infuriate them, and angry men make mistakes. Philippa will be so focused on trying to humiliate me, she won't notice what I am truly doing." Reluctantly, Rhys agreed. He trusted her intelligence, but the thought of her inside that nest of vipers gnawed at him. He sent a small, trusted team of his own men ahead, disguised as tradesmen and gamekeepers, to watch the estate. The Harrington country estate, Oakwood Manor, was a monument to new money trying to imitate old. It was grand, but lacked the soul of a place like Alveston. As they arrived, Camilla felt the oppressive weight of the family's ambition in every gilded cornice and polished statue. Lord Harrington greeted them with a smile that was all teeth. "Alveston, so good of you to come, and you've brought your charming fiancé." Philippa was at his side, looking radiant in emerald green. "Miss Vaughan," she said, her voice like honey laced with arsenic. "Welcome to our home. I do hope you won't find the country air too robust for your delicate constitution." The evening was a trial by fire. Philippa and her friends took every opportunity to isolate Camilla, making veiled insults about her family, her former poverty, her taste. But Camilla was no longer the shrinking wallflower. With the Alverstone signet ring a heavy, reassuring weight on her hand. A finer, more feminine version had been made, but she often wore the original on a chain beneath her bodice. She met their barbs with cool, unshakable poise. She had the Duke's name. She was untouchable. While Rhys kept Lord Harrington occupied with talk of politics, Camilla executed her plan. Pleading a headache, she slipped away from the ballroom, with the ever-loyal Annette acting as a lookout. Using a map she had memorized from the Alveston archives, she found her way through the servants' corridors and out into the sprawling gardens. The moon was high and bright. She moved quickly, a grey shawl covering her glittering ball gown, until she found it, hidden behind a high brick wall and a locked iron gate. The Poison Garden. It was larger than the late Duke's journal had suggested. Neat rows of foxglove, nightshade, hemlock, and, in the centre, a huge, thriving bed of monkshood, its purple flowers looking like dark hoods in the moonlight. But it was what was next to the garden that made her breath catch. A small stone building, half hidden by ivy. A distiller's shed. The lock on the door was old and rusted. Using a hairpin, a skill learned from sheer boredom during her long afternoons at her aunt's, she managed to work the lock open. The air inside was stale and acrid. On a dusty workbench sat glass vials, beakers, and a small, complex distillation apparatus. And in a crate, tucked under a pile of sacking, she found a small, leather-bound ledger. Her hands trembling, she opened it. It was a distillation record, kept in Lord Harrington's spidery handwriting. Dates, quantities, chemical formulas, and a date from 10 years prior, just 2 days before the old Duke's death, with a single entry. Aconite. Triple distillation. For the Alveston hunt. This was it. The proof. Tearing the page carefully from the ledger, she tucked it into her bodice and slipped back towards the main house. She re-entered the ballroom just as the orchestra was beginning a new waltz. Rhys saw her immediately, his eyes questioning. She gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. A wave of relief so profound it nearly buckled his knees washed over him. But they had not gone unnoticed. A footman, loyal to Harrington, had seen her emerge from the gardens and had run to his master. Lord Harrington, his face mottled with fury and panic, knew he was cornered. He decided on a desperate, ruinous gamble. He strode to the centre of the ballroom, calling for silence. "My lords, ladies and gentlemen, a moment of your attention." The music faltered and stopped. A confused murmur spread through the room. "It has come to my attention," Harrington announced, his voice booming with false indignation, "that we have a charlatan in our midst. The Duke of Alveston, in a desperate bid to escape his honourable obligations to my family, has concocted a fraudulent engagement with this nobody." He pointed a shaking finger at Camilla. Gasps filled the room. Philippa looked on with a triumphant smirk. "He has preyed upon this poor, impressionable girl," Harrington continued, filling her head with nonsense to use her as a shield for his own cowardice. Ask him to tell you of the love he bears her. He cannot, for it is a lie." All eyes turned to Rhys and Camilla. It was the ultimate test. Their entire charade was about to be ripped apart. Rhys's hand clenched. He could deny it, of course, but it was his word against a powerful peer. But it was Camilla who stepped forward, her voice ringing out with surprising clarity. "It is you who are the liar, Lord Harrington." She moved to the centre of the room, a figure of quiet, silver-grey defiance. "You speak of honour, yet you have none. You accuse the Duke of deception to cover a crime far, far worse." "What is this nonsense?" Harrington blustered. "I believe it is this," Camilla said, pulling the damning page from her bodice. She did not read it aloud. Instead, she walked directly to the most powerful man in the room, besides Rhys, the elderly Earl of Kenwood, a man known for his unimpeachable integrity and his long friendship with Rhys's father. "My Lord Kenwood," she said, her voice steady. "You knew the late Duke of Alveston well. Perhaps you would recognize the details in this record, which I have just removed from Lord Harrington's private poison distillery, hidden behind his garden wall." She handed him the page. The Earl's face, already pale, turned to ash as he read it. He looked from the page to Lord Harrington, his eyes filled with a dawning horror and disgust. "This is a distiller's record, Harrington," the Earl said, his voice shaking with rage. "It details the creation of a potent aconite poison, dated 2 days before my friend, Charles St. Clair, died of a supposed heart seizure on your land." The silence in the ballroom was absolute, broken only by Philippa's horrified gasp. Lord Harrington stared, trapped, his face collapsing in on itself. He had meant to unmask a fraud, but had instead been unmasked as a murderer. Rhys moved to Camilla's side, his hand finding hers, his grip no longer a performance, but a gesture of profound, bone-deep gratitude and admiration. He looked at the woman he had once dismissed as a mouse, a shadow. She had faced down the jackal that had haunted his family for a decade, and, with nothing but her courage and intellect, she had destroyed him. "Seize him!" the Earl of Kenwood commanded his footman. As Lord Harrington was dragged away, sputtering threats and denials, Rhys leaned down and whispered in Camilla's ear, his words for her alone. "They thought you were powerless. They were all fools." The downfall of House Harrington was absolute, a swift and satisfying conclusion to a decade of deceit. As the scandal faded from the society pages, a new, unspoken tension settled over Ulverston House. The threat was gone, but so was the premise of their arrangement. The contract had been fulfilled, leaving only an uncertain silence in its wake. Rhys found Camilla in the library, her now familiar sanctuary. She looked up from her book with a quiet smile, but it faltered when she saw the sheaf of documents in his hand. "The solicitors have finalized the settlement," he said, his voice unnaturally formal. "The deeds and the bank drafts, everything we agreed upon." He held the papers out to her, a testament to a bargain that now felt like a relic from another lifetime. Camilla stared at the documents, the legal confirmation of the freedom she once craved. Now it felt only like an ending. She made no move to take them. "Is that what you want, Rhys?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "No," he said, the word raw and immediate. He dropped the papers onto a table, dismissing them with the sound of rustling parchment. "It is not what I want." He closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "When I proposed this arrangement, I was a fool. I chose you because I thought you were unobtrusive, a shadow. I was wrong. You are the least invisible person I have ever known." He lifted a hand to her face, his touch gentle. "I have spent 10 years consumed by revenge, living in a world of shadows. You walked into that world and brought the light with you. The thought of this house, of my life, without you in it, is unthinkable. The deal is void, Camilla. I am selfishly, desperately in love with you." Tears of disbelief and hope welled in Camilla's eyes. "I thought I was just part of the plan," she breathed. "You were," he admitted, his stormy eyes filled with a warmth that was entirely real. "But then you became everything." He slid the ducal signet ring from her finger. For a terrifying moment, she thought he was taking it back. Instead, the formidable Duke of Ulverston knelt before her, holding the symbol of his power not as a claim, but as a humble offering. "Camilla Vaughan," he said, his voice thick with sincerity. "They thought you were powerless. I thought you were a means to an end. We were both wrong. You are the strongest person I know, and you are the end of my searching. Will you marry me? For real this time?" Through her tears she laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated happiness. The invisible woman who had only ever dreamed of freedom had found it not in solitude, but in the heart of the man she loved. "Yes," she whispered, her voice full of certainty. "Oh yes, Rhys, I will." He slid the heavy ring back onto her finger, where it belonged. It was no longer a symbol of a contract or a charade. It was a promise of a life filled with love, respect, and a partnership forged in shadows, but destined for the sun. And so, the story of Camilla Vaughan, the woman they wrote off as a nobody, came to its true beginning. Her journey wasn't about a magical transformation from servant to princess. It was about the world finally opening its eyes to the power that was inside her all along. She proved that true strength isn't found in titles or wealth, but in a sharp mind, an observant eye, and a courageous heart that refuses to be extinguished, even in the darkest of rooms. Her love story with the Duke wasn't born of a fairy tale glance across a ballroom, but forged in conspiracy, tested by danger, and ultimately built on a foundation of profound mutual respect. She wasn't just his duchess, she was his equal, his confidant, and his greatest victory. If you were captivated by Camilla's story of hidden strength and unexpected love, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with a friend who loves a story where the underdog comes out on top. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell for more historical romance stories that bring the past to life. Thank you for listening.